wherever you are writing your business plan or getting your thoughts down onto a piece of paper somewhere, hopefully this will help develop the technology side of your presentation. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about later includes what's your internet strategy, what's your internet marketing plans, what are those 9 P's of the marketing mix that we talk about that are related to somehow online presence or your internet presence. For those of you that maybe don't have a web design already, a website design, in the book we talk about some of the strategies to find a web designer, some of the questions that you need to be asking and that can help empower you to kind of make some good choices. So I'm going to turn it over right away. I'll introduce briefly and I'll let him do a much more thorough introduction. This is David Allison from Ron Allison, and yeah, it's up to you.
I'm all ready. No, I just didn't want to steal your thunder.
Oh, no, thunder.
I'm going to trip on this though, so can I move this out of the way?
Whatever you need.
Hi everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is David Allison. I'm a member of the Métis Nation. I'm from Winnipeg, from the Red River area, and from Medicine Hat. First off, just thank you all for asking me to be here tonight on Tsawwassen First Nation territory, and I'm very excited to see what I can do to teach you some of the things that I've learned in the 25-something years I've been doing this, and maybe some stuff will help you with the businesses that you're trying to start. Or I understand some of you already got your businesses going, so I'm going to try and keep my talk today very short and very general, so that we can spend more time answering specific questions, because that way it can be more about what you're faced with right now, as opposed to some big theoretical thing that I might want to talk about instead. So we'll try and be as real world as we can. So my company's called Ron Allison. We're a marketing, branding, communications company. We work primarily with real estate. So real estate developers will hire us to help them talk to the people that they want to talk to about the product that they're building. And so in doing that, all the skills that we have and all the things that we've learned how to do apply regardless of what it is that what your company's up to. Whether you're selling a service or a product, whether it's a big thing or a small thing, it doesn't really matter. It's just really about telling stories and about helping people understand what it is you have in a way that motivates them to do business with you. So I'm going to try and be general. You might find me slipping into some examples that are about real estate because it's what I talk about all day long. So whenever I say real estate, you can substitute whatever you're doing for that word and the sentence will still make sense. It'll still be applicable. So one of the things they tell you to do when you're giving a speech is to tell a little story about yourself so people get to know you a bit. So I'm going to tell you about my Mars bar story. When I was a kid, I was about 10 years old, and my favorite candy was Mars bars. And around this time, I was at school, and I figured out that school at Mars was the name of a planet. And then this light bulb went off for me, and I connected these two things, that my favorite candy was named after a planet. So Mom and Dad got me a TV table. Remember TV tables? And the rec room with the paneling and the shag. So I had pencil crayons, and I drew what I thought would be a really good television commercial for Mars bars, about them being from Mars. And I sent it to the Mars bar company. And I sent it off to them, and about, then I'm 10, right? So I didn't think about it very much. About 4 weeks later, I got a box of Mars bars and a thank you note from the Mars bar people. And I thought, well, this is awesome. I can think up marketing stuff and get paid for it. So really, I've been in marketing and branding and storytelling since I was 10 and had my first experience with the Mars bar. So now you know a little bit about me and about what my interests were when I was growing up. I'm going to tell you just a quick little bit about who I am and what my company's done. Not to brag, but I just want you to understand the kind of filter that I'm bringing to the stuff we're going to talk about today. So I've worked at a lot of different companies in Winnipeg and in Calgary and here. And the companies I've worked for, we've worked all over Canada and all over North America and even off North America into other continents. I've taught at the University of Calgary for a little while. All my jobs have been about this stuff. It's been about how to help companies understand a better way to talk to their consumers. So right now, Ron Allison, my company, what we do every day is we make stuff for our clients. So we make direct mail campaigns, we make print ads, we make websites, we make social media campaigns, whatever the specifics are that a particular client, a particular company needs most. We have the people in our company, the writers and the designers to make that stuff come together and make it for them. So that's what I spend my day doing, and we've done it all over the world. One day I'll tell you the story about working with a company out of Mongolia. That was pretty interesting. They didn't speak any English and had translators, and they would fly into Vancouver once a month with their translators. And everything you said, you had to say in short sentences, because then the translator would have to translate it into Mongolian, and then back and forth, back and forth.
But you got Texas on there too, so it's the same thing.
It's pretty much the same as dealing with people from Texas, yeah. Actually, the first time I went to a meeting in Texas, I was in a boardroom at a big company there, and I told some joke about George Bush, forgetting where I was.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
And then the people I was with were like kind of looking at me, what did you just say? I'm like, oh, right, okay, carry on. Let's skip over that.
So they started calling you David Chick after that.
Yeah, exactly. So the big message I want to give you today, and the thing I want to talk about, is that this is a really awesome time to be starting a company. It's only been very recently that small companies and startup companies have had the opportunity to do things that it was always just the big companies could do. It used to be you had to have a lot of money in order to talk to people and in order to tell a message about your company and tell a message about your product or your service. And it's only been in the last few years that it's been an opportunity for anybody, regardless of how big your company is, to have that same power to tell stories and to use stories as a way to connect people to your product or service. So a little bit of context before we go on. I give this speech to really big rooms sometimes, and I have notes with me. So there's a couple slides where it says things like the 5 root causes of the marketing revolution. And I don't remember what all 5 of them are because I don't have my notes, but I'll do my best. So the 5 root causes of this revolution. I hope I'm not being graded on this. But there's a bunch of things that were going on before the recession started. And they were kind of going on at their own pace anyway. And one of them was that we were all looking for, I don't like this word because we use it too much, but we were all looking for authenticity. People want to connect to companies that are real. They don't want to connect to companies that are doing fake stuff. They want to make sure that the companies that they're spending their money with are honest and are trying to do good things. So that was one big trend that was happening anyway. And another big trend that was happening was this notion of conversation. That if I call a company today, or I have a problem, or I have something I want to say, or I want to talk, I expect somebody's going to call me back or respond to my email. That's new. That wasn't like that 5, 6, 7 years ago. Companies didn't talk to their customers. You bought my thing or you didn't buy my thing. After you bought my thing, you can go away until it's next time you want to buy my thing again, right? So there's this notion of this being 2 ways, which was another root cause of what I call the marketing revolution. Another thing that's changed in the last little while, another one of these 5 root causes, is the digital, the switch to digital. We're all so familiar and so comfortable with computers and with Facebook and with email and with social media and all these kinds of things. My dad, who's 77 this year, is one of my Facebook friends. So if my 77-year-old dad in Winnipeg is now connected to me on social media, anybody who still thinks these digital tools are for young people or for somebody other than anyone is wrong. These are just universal tools that we all have now to access. So everybody's more comfortable with digital. That's a big trend. And at the same time, when the recession came along, the inverse of that trend was that we don't trust the traditional media the same way we used to. The newspapers, the television news, the reporters, they were all part of the system that told us everything was going to be okay. And then it wasn't. And so there's this mistrust around what the newspaper says that never used to be there before. It used to be that if it was on the evening news, it must be the truth. If it was in the newspaper, it's got to be real. Well, now we're all kind of questioning that a little bit. And instead, we're going to places like Facebook and asking our friends, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? We're having conversations, 2-way conversations, instead of just reading things and saying, well, that's the way it is. And the 5th root cause of the marketing revolution has totally escaped me, but I got 4 out of 5, so that's a passing grade, so I think that's pretty good.
And if you think of it later, you can always come back.
I can always come back. So those 4 things, like I said, were all kind of ticking along at their own time. And then suddenly we had this horrible thing happen, the recession. And what the result was, all of these trends kind of sped up and mashed together and made this one big thing happen that I call the marketing revolution. And it's really very simple. It's gone from 1-way communication to 2-way communication. That's been the net result. Is that it's not just about rich companies sitting in their boardroom saying, here's what's going to be in our print ad anymore. We all have the ability to tell stories and to be the media and to talk to our consumers. But before we get into any more of this stuff, the one key bedrock thing that we all have to agree to is that whatever you're building, whatever your service or product is, it has to be awesome. Because there's so many people watching what you're doing now, and they all have the ability to get on Facebook and say it's not awesome, you better be doing awesome stuff. Because there's a lot of watchdogs. There's what was it, yesterday or the day before, that somebody decided that we're going to officially say that was the day when the world hit 7 billion people. 7 billion people, and a whole lot of them have computers, and a whole lot of them are watching what you're doing. And if you don't do a great product, they're going to get on the computer and tell the world about it. Now, at the same time, if you're doing awesome stuff, they'll get on the computer and be cheerleaders for you. And go, oh my God, this company's doing amazing things. So it's a great opportunity, but it does mean that we all have to build good things. We have to agree that that's a bedrock principle to start with. So at my company, we talk about marketing journalism, because I think the old way we used to do advertising and marketing and try and connect to consumers is over. It used to be that a kooky headline and a great photo, and throw it in the newspaper enough times and people would buy your stuff. Today, I think because of the recession and all those trends we talked about, and because of the digital revolution, people are researching things. So I think about my own world, for example. I would go and buy a television set. The way it would happen in the old days is you'd walk into the TV store and you'd say, I think I want to buy one of those new flat screen TVs for the wall in my living room. And what do you got? And the sales guy would say, well, we got this model and this model, whatever, and they'd educate you and they'd end up selling you the one that they make the biggest commission on, right? That's how it would go. Well, today I'm going to spend a whole lot of time online first. I'm going to know more about flat screen TVs than the sales guy does before I even go into that store. And if he tries to sell me something for $1 more than the store next door, I know that. And so I'm going to get a better deal. So that's a change. Consumers are now looking for information. So as you're starting your companies and you're thinking about what you want to say to the consumers that you're going to talk to, you need to give them all kinds of good information. They're going to get it from somewhere else if you don't be the one who supplies it. So tell lots and lots of stories, lots of information. I had a great conversation with Loretta and Mabel at dinner about the hats they're making and the cedar work that they're doing. I think people will buy those if they know how long it takes you to weave those and where you get the cedar from and how many generations your family's been doing this work and how you prepare the cedar before you weave it and what all of that stuff people want to know before they're going to buy the hat. And when they do buy the hat, that hat now means more to them than hat. That hat means so much more because you've put all those stories into the hat for them, right? So regardless of what your company is, those stories that you can tell, the marketing journalism, as we call it, can make your product or service more valuable because people are going to appreciate it more when they understand what's gone into the thing that you're trying to sell. So I like using analogies to remember things because it helps me. Lots of stuff going on in my head. So I'm going to give you one of my favorite analogies about the new marketing world, and I just call it the stadium analogy. So the old way we used to do marketing, we'd show up at the stadium every day and there'd be, 7 billion people in this big imaginary stadium. And at one end of the stadium there was a stage. And the really rich big companies and the big media were up on the stage. And they were the ones who got to tell us stories. And if you were rich enough or big enough, you could pay to get up on stage for 30 seconds of television time or buy a page in the newspaper, and you'd get your turn on stage to talk to this crowd. And that's how it went. If you weren't a big rich company who could afford time on stage, you didn't get to tell stories. You could talk to the person right beside you in the stadium, but that's about it. So we showed up this morning, the new way of marketing, and the stadium has changed because someone took away the stage. So all those guys are still there. Those big rich companies, they're out in the crowd somewhere, and they're yelling and screaming. They want you to pay attention to them. They're still trying to be the newspaper or the TV station. They're still trying to make sure that you understand that they've got a lot to say. But you can hardly see them anymore because there's 7 billion people who are also trying to tell stories. And you can pay as much attention. It's just as easy to get the attention of the people around you as it is for the rich guy over in the corner with the big newspaper as for him to get the attention of the people around him. So the playing field's been leveled. The stage is gone. So it's an awesome time to be starting a company because suddenly you're in this stadium and a few simple tricks that I'm going to talk about in a minute, you can be just as powerful and have just as many people paying attention to you as the big companies used to have. So that's a good analogy. And the reason to remember that analogy is because there's going to be a lot of questions you have that I won't answer tonight because we don't have time. But if you keep coming back to this analogy, anytime you have a question about how you do your marketing, how would you behave in that stadium? And I'll do that a bit tonight as we go on. That stadium can answer all your questions. That analogy can be a place to go back to and go, how would it work in there? Then the answers will be obvious.
And David, just for the record, if anybody wants, since you are very animated and exciting, and there's a lot of information coming, and for most of us, for some of us, it'll be the first time we've thought about how this is going to apply to our business. I don't have a problem, and I'm sure Ryan will too. We can make this like available for people to come and sit down and watch again.
Sure.
So as you do your business plan, you go, okay, now wait, what do you say about that?
I've also got photocopies of all these
Cool.
pictures I'm putting up here, which may trigger your memory. So I'll hand those out before we finish tonight.
And
So-
there's a handout too, if people want to be taking notes, asking questions after, you can do that too. So, and yeah.
And I promise I'll stop talking in about another 10 minutes,
No.
and we'll go to questions. Okay? So writing and design are important things to think about today, more important than they used to be. They've always been important, but let's go back to the stadium for a minute. So you're going into that stadium this morning as a company owner, and you're trying to get some people to pay attention to you. So if you have good writing and design, what that means in the stadium is you know what you're going to say, and you've thought about how to say it, and you're wearing a sharp suit, and you got your hair cut, and you're looking good. And you stand in the stadium, more people will pay attention to you than if you show up and you don't know what you're saying. You haven't really figured out how to talk about your company, and you may be, not looking your best today. You're not designed properly. It's more important than ever in this new kind of stadium environment to make sure that your words and your pictures and how you present yourself are really well thought about, because it's a way to get people to pay attention to you in this big crowded stadium. So that was a little bit of context and stuff. I'm going to give you some specific tips now, and then we'll finish and we'll go into questions. So these are some specific tips to think about for your company. One thing that many small companies forget to do is to be able to write down and explain to everyone you work with in the company, who are you and what you're trying to do. So it's easy to say, I'm a florist, I make hats, I work with cedar. That's simple. But if you asked, even in a small company of maybe 2, 3, 5 people, you asked everybody what that company does, they'd all have a different version of the story. And in this stadium, it's important that everybody says the same story, that they say it the same way, and they say it over and over and over. So one of the really important things is make sure everyone in the company knows what it is you're trying to accomplish. However you want to define that, whatever the words are that you want to use to talk about your product or service, just make sure everyone knows, so that they all understand where you're headed and what you're trying to become. This is something new that's happened in the stadium that didn't apply as much in the old days, in the old stadium with the stage at the front. In this new stadium model that we're talking about, the more precise your audience definition can be, the more precisely you can say to yourself and the people in your company who you're trying to sell to, the easier it is going to be to find those people in that big crowd. So in my business, when we work with real estate developers, every meeting I went to about a new project for 20 years, you'd go in and say, who are we trying to sell these real estate, these homes to? And the answer was wealthy boomers. And that was, everyone would nod and write that down, and that's what we said. Now we have to say very, very precisely. We're trying to talk to, I'll give you an example from our world, 45 to 50-year-old couples who are professionals who make X number of dollars a year and live in this part of the city, and they think this about this, and they have these kinds of savings, and this is the way they live their life. The more precise we can get around who we're talking to, the easier it is to find those people in the stadium. If I just walk into that stadium and just start talking, I don't know who's listening to me. But if I walk into that stadium and I'm Mabel and Loretta and I'm trying to sell hats, and I can go in there and start talking very, very specifically to people who are interested in traditional Aboriginal handicrafts and about a lineage of craft work that's gone down through multiple generations. And I know that there's people who collect these things and who are interested in the history of these things in that stadium somewhere. And I know that's who I'm trying to talk to. then my story and the way I make my website and the way my writing and design around my company comes together can be very precise to those people. So you end up saving money because you're not wasting time talking to a bunch of people who are never, no matter how beautiful they are, going to buy one of Loretta or Mabel's hats. You're only talking to the people who you know are interested in the hats. So, very precise with your audience is a good thing to do. We've talked a lot about stories. Stories in an Aboriginal context are it's an interesting word because it's a very loaded word culturally. There's stories that are for sharing and there's other stories that are not for sharing. When I'm talking about stories in a marketing context, I'm talking about the stories about your product or service that very specific audience that you've defined, those people in the stadium that you want to talk to, the stories they're going to find interesting about your product or service. So in the old days, again, I'll talk about it in the real estate world, we would say everything we sold, we would very proudly say, we have a stainless steel kitchen appliance package. And we figured that was a really good story. And it was. It sold a lot of real estate. Today, what we'd like to say instead is, there's a stainless steel kitchen appliance package, but we chose this brand because if you go to this webpage, you'll see that it was ranked highest by consumer third-party reporting agencies. And it's a little bit smaller than a normal refrigerator, let's say, because this is a smaller apartment and we wanted to make sure you had more counter space. So we chose a slightly smaller refrigerator. And there's a grocery store in the corner, so we know you don't need as big a refrigerator as you would if you didn't have a grocery store nearby. So we'll tell you all of those stories instead of just saying, we have a stainless steel refrigerator, because people are looking for more information. Now that refrigerator, when they see that, they're thinking about that home. Remember we talked about this a moment ago, it's not just a hat anymore. It's a hat that has stories attached to it. It's not just a refrigerator anymore. It's a refrigerator that has stories attached to it. So you attach stories to the things you're trying to do, and suddenly they're worth more. So think about big stories. It isn't just about the hats, it's about a cultural tradition that's been handed down on this land for generations. That's a big story. Talk about deep stories. It's not just about hats, it's about 18 hours of time it takes just to weave the hat, let alone gather the material, let alone know where to gather the material or learn how to deal with the material in order to make the hat in the first place. That's a really deep story. It's going deep around one topic area. And then wide stories, there's hats, there's baskets, there's flower arranging, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that Mabel and Loretta are working on, so there's a wide story that can be told as well. So think about your stories from all those different kinds of directions. I promise not to talk for very long today, and here I am blathering on and on.
Sounds like a politician.
Yeah, exactly.
In a good way.
Hopefully a good politician, if there's such a So another tip that you can take away that your staff needs to understand and your stories need to tell is what kind of a company are you? And to make it funny, I just said, are you Paris Hilton or are you Dan Rather? Like, what's the personality of your brand? And the reason I use famous people is because it's a really great way for everybody who's working on a company to communicate with each other. Because the language is not a really reliable way to talk about personality issues. Because what Leanna thinks is a contemporary thing and what Opal thinks is a contemporary thing are probably two very different things. But if Opal and Leanna both say, this company is like Paris Hilton, we all know instantly what that means, right? We don't have to try and find words that describe it. So if you can find a famous person that has the right attitude that you want your company to have, if you want to have a Harrison Ford company, that's a great way for your whole company, everybody who works for you, to understand what kind of company you're going to be. You're going to be a Dan Rather company, you're going to be a Brad Pitt company, you're going to be an Angelina Jolie company, somebody famous that we all know. That's a good kind of code language to use to figure out how to talk about your company. Okay, so I know today's about technology. I have one thing I'd like you to remember, one really important, probably the most important thing I'm going to talk about tonight, and that's websites are so vital today. They used to be, I'm old enough, I remember when a website was an extra. It was, first you have a good product and maybe a brochure and a business card, and then if you had some money, you'd maybe just think about a website. Today you got to start with a website, because the first thing everybody, 99.9% of the world is going to do when they decide it's time to buy something is they're going to go onto the computer and go to Google and start looking for information. And if you don't have a website, you're lost. You're hooked. You're not even in the game. So don't even print business cards until you've got a website figured out. It's got to be the most important thing on your list. It's the number one item on your list. And when we talk about the marketing journalism approach to websites, I'm going to try and keep this, again, really short. I can talk about this stuff for hours, so it's really hard for me to be brief around this. Websites, in the old days, we would call them just brochure websites, right? It was like 6 pages of pretty pictures and a couple of words. And you click through maybe a little history of the company or something like that. A marketing journalism website today, websites need to be packed with information. All these stories we talked about. You're trying to stand out in that stadium. You want people to know more about you, have more stories attached to your company, because what do more stories do? It makes your things more valuable, right? So your website is your most important storytelling tool. It's not a place to be brief. It's not a place to, oh, I don't want to put a lot of information here. Put everything you can think of there. All those stories, the big ones, the wide ones, the deep ones, all those stories should be on your website. And the more of them you can put on the homepage, the better. Because Google is the way we find out what we're going to buy. We all go onto Google and start searching for things. Google likes websites that have lots of words on the homepage. So the more words you can cram on your homepage, the better. Don't just have a homepage with a photo on it. Google will never find you. You may as well not even have a website. Well, it's better than not having a website, but it's almost not as good as having a website. So put lots of information on your website and put as much of it as you can on the front page. So this digital world we're in, there's lots of emphasis on websites and social media and all these kinds of new digital tools, but all the old ways we use to talk about our companies are still very valuable too. But what's different, and this is another key point, because the website is the most important thing, and everything else is really just trying to get you to go to the website. So if you're somebody in the stadium that I want to have a business relationship with, I'm going to try and sell you something, all I really want to do through my marketing efforts is to get you onto my website where all those great stories are. So if you're going to use a print ad or a business card or a direct mail flyer or an email, all those other tools, they're really just directional signage. They're really just a way to say to people, get to my website. All the good stuff is there. So what does a print ad today have to do differently if that's its job? In the old days, we thought print ads were supposed to sell things. Well, no, print ads just make people get to the website. So what you put in the print ad, you have to think about that differently now than you would before when you were trying to sell things with your print ad. Now it's just a directional sign. So there's different rules around all of those other traditional mediums have changed because the website is so primary and so central to what we're doing. So a couple quick thoughts about social media. One thing, I'm not a big social media technology guy. I believe it's a really good way to tell stories, and this is all about attaching stories to your product or your service because it makes them more valuable. Social media is a great way to attach stories to your product or your service. It can be very intimidating. It feels like there's a whole lot of work you have to do, and it's true. There is a lot of commitment of time to be in the social media world in a good way, and not just do it because someone like me said you should. To actually do it well, you have to be willing to, the one thing every marketer needs to know, it's an easy thing to remember because it's right in the name, you have to be willing to be social. Social media is only going to work if you treat it like being at that stadium. And when you go into that stadium, if you walk in there every day and all you do is say, buy my hat, buy my hat, buy my hat. And you walk around the stadium and you're Mabel and you just go, buy my hat, buy my hat, buy my hat. No one's going to want to talk to you because you're boring, right? But if you go in that stadium and you go, hi, my name's Mabel and I've got a great story I want to tell you. And Mabel, when we were having dinner, she was telling me that she spent today picking apples up in the backyard at her house because your sister makes pies, and so I know a little bit about Mabel, and Mabel heard my story about the Mars bar, so Mabel and I are like best friends now, right? So we've been social with each other. Now Mabel's more likely to think I'm a good guy, and I think Mabel's a great gal, and I'm more interested in what Mabel wants to sell me, because we've been social with each other. But if you don't take that step first, if you just use social media as a way to go, buy my hat, then it's not worth it. Don't do it. Because it's not going to do you any favors. You're just the rude guy at the party who won't shut up about the thing that you're trying to sell. So, social media, be social. That's really the end of the slides I brought for you today. There's, again, lots and lots of other things we can talk about, but just the quick summary is that there's been a big change in the last couple of years. And those of us who work in the marketing world as a profession, we're still all trying to figure it out. The big change is that it's gone from this one-way conversation where we just had to have clients that could afford to buy their way up onto that stage in the stadium. And now we have to work for every piece of attention that we can get in that stadium where everybody's on equal footing. But the great news again for all of you who are starting companies or who've just started companies or maybe into your first or second year, I'm not sure exactly where everybody's at, is that it's an equal playing field. You can show up at that stadium every day with a good story and a great website, looking good,